Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out today to join us in support of our Senator Bob Casey. Many of you know that we're less than 3 weeks away from electing a new president, a new female president, as well as re-electing dedicated public servants like Senator Casey, who has been working tirelessly on behalf of all Pennsylvanians. Now, if you've never run a statewide campaign, you don't know how big the state is, this Commonwealth. It's huge. It's huge. But our senator makes it feel like it's tiny Delaware because he is everywhere, folks. He is everywhere and he cares. And that's why we need him to be reelected. Selfishly, I want him to stay in office. Is the audio okay? Should I walk this way? Sorry, Senator Murray. I needed him to stay in office because he knows how to hire outstanding staff, his team. We work closely together to serve the folks in Harrisburg, and it is truly an honor to work with him and his team. Now, as a mother, I know firsthand the struggle of balancing childcare with work. When I had my first child, I left my job in the news business, and the folks here behind the cameras know that it doesn't pay much, and the childcare would have equaled my salary. So I had to step away. I know that a lot of folks, single moms, don't have that option, but I know that Bob Casey understands. He's been working hard to permanently expand the child tax credit, which would put money back into the pockets of moms and dads and families in this area. As you know, Bob Casey is a family man. Together with his wife, Therese, they've raised 4 daughters, and I'm sure they help keep him grounded and humbled at all times. So that's the kind of person I want in the Senate, representing me. Someone who understands family values, understands our needs, and wants to make sure that women have control of our own bodies. All while serving with humility and integrity. Folks, let's re-elect Bob Casey, right? But before we go to our senator, it is my great honor to introduce Senator Patty Murray, who has a great first name. She has been a powerful voice for the state of Washington. Senator Murray is a trailblazer for women like me, having broken barriers by holding many high-ranking positions. We're grateful for her leadership and for making the trip to support our Senator Murray.
Thank you so much. I am so excited to be here in Pennsylvania and to have an opportunity to thank all of you for being out and working hard to make sure Bob comes back to the U.S. Senate to work with me, and also to make sure that Patty's reelected. So thank you for all you're doing. Give her a round. For those of you who don't know me, I have been in the Senate over 30 years now. Never expected that to be where my life went, but way back when my kids were little, back in Washington State, our state legislature decided to take away the funding for the early childhood education program that my kids were in. So they were 1 and 3. I stuck them in the back of my car. I drove 100 miles to our state capital, where I just thought I just had to tell legislators how important this program was, and of course they'd reinstate the funding for it. That didn't happen. I ran into a male politician who looked exactly like I expected, you know, tall, dark suit, red tie. And I started telling him how important it was that we have preschool programs and early childhood education. And he looked at me and he said, "That's really nice, but you can't make a difference. You're just a mom in tennis shoes." That is how I got into politics. I got mad. So I am very excited to be here today to talk to a mom's group who knows how important it is and how important your voice is. Because I will tell you, I took that slam at me and I went back home and I organized parents all over my state before we had phones and texts, just started calling people. I said, grab 10 moms, sign this petition, bring your kids. We're all going to show up in the state capitol on this day. And we went down and inundated our state legislature with over 13,000 families. And they had to reinstate that program. So I'm here today to tell you moms can make a difference, especially when you're mad. And boy, do we have a lot to be mad about. So I will tell you, this election, I'm all the way out here in Pennsylvania because this election, really everything I have worked my entire life on is at stake. Whether or not we fund public education, whether or not we have child care for families in this country, finally. When I went into the Senate, I was the only voice there talking about child education and child care and these things that were so important to me and my family. Now we have champions like Bob, and we have Kamala running for president who gets these issues. These are at stake in this election. And of course, when the Supreme Court overturned Roe, it was the maddest I have been in a very long time, and I thought, we've got to fight back. So I'm delighted to be here with all of you because I know you get that. You understand how important this election is. And sitting at home and griping about it is not going to change anything. Going out and working hard and talking to other families and telling them how important it is and getting them to vote will make all the difference in the world for all of our kids and the future of this country. So I'm delighted to be here to thank you for being out there, for working hard, for getting other people to work hard and get them to the polls and vote. Because I will tell you, what I care about will not happen unless Bob Casey comes back to the U.S. Senate. All eyes on Pennsylvania here. We know how important this state is. We know how important every single vote is. I'll be in Washington State on election night, but I will tell you what, you're 3 hours ahead of us. But I know where I'm going to be at 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock and 8 o'clock in the next morning as well, because watching to see what you do. Bob is a champion. You know this. He is a champion for our kids, for our families, for the child tax credit, for child care, for people with disabilities. I serve with him in the Senate, and when he speaks, we listen because he speaks from his heart. So thank you for being out here. Thank you for fighting. Keep working. We're going to get there in a few weeks, and the work you do is going to make the difference. So I'm just delighted to be here to introduce you to my colleague and my friend and my champion on children's issues, Bob Casey.
Thanks, Patty. Thanks so much. Thanks very much. Thank you. I want to welcome you all to the Bob and Patty show. No, I'm just so grateful to be here with you and to be here with two distinguished elected officials from Washington State and Pennsylvania. I'll start with Patty Kim. Patty's going to be the next state senator, 15th district, right? And we're grateful grateful that she decided to take on the challenge of running for the Senate after serving in the House so ably and so honorably in representing her district. And it gets us closer and closer to a state Senate majority. But I'm honored that Patty's running and that she's helping me. I just said to Patty backstage, if I can just hang on to some of her votes as she skies forward, I'll do pretty well election night in this region, in this state Senate district. And to be with Patty Murray is such an honor because I've been in the Senate a little while, and you tend to learn from others in the Senate, and you try to watch their progression or their leadership qualities, and Patty Murray has been leading on so many fronts. She was chairman of the Health Education Committee that I'm a member of, Health Education, Labor Pension, so-called HELP Committee. I watched her lead that committee, watched her lead the Appropriations Committee now. We want to continue to be in the majority so she can remain the chair of that committee. But I think what's probably most telling about Patty Murray's leadership is not just her advocacy on behalf of children and families, advocacy on behalf of women, advocacy on behalf of people who often don't have a voice or enough of a voice in government, but it's also what she prevails on. Usually when Patty Murray goes into a negotiation, she'll win the negotiation, no matter who it's against. I could tell you a story, and I won't tell it here today, but against a significant Republican about a decade ago, and all the press in Washington was saying, oh, this guy is so smart, and he's going to do so well in this budget negotiation. Well, when he came out of that negotiation with Patty Murray, he not only lost the negotiation, but he was like bleeding from under his eye. And he was about 3 feet taller than she is. But she's fought so hard for for women in America and for children and families. And I'm just honored she traveled all this way across several time zones to be here with us and to help us. She's helping candidates all across the country. So let's hear it again for Patty Murray. Look, I don't think I have to explain to anyone here what's on the line in this election. We have in front of us a decision to make as a people, and it's in the hands of the people of our state. It just so happens it falls upon our shoulders again to decide the course of the next, not just the next 4 years, but I think a lot longer than that. And it isn't simply the usual debate we've been having in America for several generations about what we're going to do on health care or what will happen on tax policy. All of that is critical. This election, though, starts with, I think, a conversation and a debate about some basic rights, whether it's voting rights or women's rights or workers' rights. And on every one of those issues, I'm on one side of the debate, my opponent's on the other. There is no common ground on those three basic rights. And voters are going to have to make a choice, because whoever wins this Senate race will be, highly likely will be in the majority. And if you have a Senate majority and a president of one party or the other, that side's going to be successful in having their position on voting rights, women's rights, and workers' rights decided for at least a generation, if not several generations. We're also going to continue to have a big disagreement on basic issues like health care and on tax policy. We've got a big tax debate next year because tax cuts from 2017 are expiring, tax cuts for big corporations and very wealthy Americans that I proudly voted against, and I'll vote against those billionaires again. Why the hell do you think they're in this state? We're advertising against me. The largest individual super PAC in the nation is here supporting my opponent. It was a super PAC set up for him. It has already outspent my entire campaign, one super PAC, set up by a small group of out-of-state billionaires supporting him. Why do you think they're doing that? They know I'm not going to vote for their billionaire tax cuts or the big corporate tax cuts, and they know that I've been going after them on greedflation. Big companies ripping off Americans by jacking up the cost of food, jacking up the cost of household items, and they don't like me talking about that. Well, I got news for those billionaires and those wealthy corporate CEOs. If they're mad at me and angry at me right now about greedflation, they're going to stay mad, because I'm going to continue to prosecute the case against them when they gouge people. We're going to pass. I'm going to continue to talk about it. They're not going to shut me up. And we're going to pass a price gouging bill to go after them and hold them accountable. You hold one of these big companies accountable, they'll get the message. When they go into that boardroom and talk to their shareholders and say, let's jack up the price and make more money, they might think twice if they know a price gouging investigation will be on their heels. So that's the second thing we're going to do, pass a price gouging bill. Third thing we're going to do is roll back those big corporate tax breaks, those obscene corporate tax breaks and tax breaks for wealthy Americans that were passed in 2017. And it's a big debate and difference between the two of us in this race. My opponent wants to double down on those corporate tax breaks, double down on those billionaire tax breaks. That's going to jack up the debt by not one, not two, not three, more than $4 trillion. By some estimates, it's above $5 trillion. So that's what you get when you support my opponent. A doubling down on those tax breaks, running up, exploding the debt by more than $4 trillion, and putting Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security on the chopping block. And that's just a partial list. So much else is on the chopping block. And oh, I forgot. If you give away the store again to very wealthy Americans and big corporations, there's no possibility of a middle-class tax cut. That's what we should do with tax policy. We should give the middle class a real break. And we should make sure that we have the robust version of the child tax credit as part of our tax law again. to give families a shot, just a shot, to be able to make ends meet, which a lot of families were able to do in the middle of the pandemic because I voted for and Patty Murray voted for and enough Democrats voted for the American Rescue Plan, which brought relief to every single community in this state, or at least every single county, and a lot of families with that child tax credit. So it's a real simple choice. There's no in between. It's either the largest corporations in America and the wealthiest Americans get a big tax break, or the middle class gets a tax break and we do the child tax credit. And I think Americans and I think Pennsylvanians are going to choose to support the middle class and families raising children with the child tax credit. So that's what's at stake. Now, this race has also been a big debate between my record as a United States Senator and my opponent's record as a hedge fund manager, hedge fund CEO, actually. He ran the largest hedge fund in the world. That hedge fund increased investments in China when he was the CEO by 108,000% when he was CEOs. He doesn't want to talk about this. That hedge fund also invested in Chinese military companies in China that were making bombers and fighter jets for China. He invested in those companies. He invested also in a company that produced 90% of the fentanyl that was manufactured in China. He invested in that as CEO. He also invested in a group of Chinese weapons manufacturers that had ties to Iran, and one expert consulted on this said that the weapons that company produced ended up in the hands of Hamas in the battle that Israel's waged against Hamas since October the 7th, 2023. That's the investments that he's made. When he was CEO of this big hedge fund, Bridgewater, he tried to silence women who were employed by Bridgewater when they came forward alleging sexual harassment in the workplace at Bridgewater. He said to one woman, if you don't shut up about this, you're going to be in litigation for the rest of your life. So that's his CEO record, investing in foreign adversaries, silencing women, and making a lot of investments, especially in China, to the detriment of United States workers, to the detriment of Pennsylvania workers. He would often have the hedge fund invest in Chinese oil companies and steel companies, actually betting against U.S. Steel when he was doing that. So that's his record. He doesn't want to talk about it, but we're going to talk about it until 8 o'clock on election night and make sure that he's held accountable for that record. And I'm going to continue to talk about my record of delivering for the people of this state, delivering in every single county, making sure that we had a cap on insulin at $35 a month for seniors on Medicare Part D beneficiaries, right? Voting in that same bill, when we voted to pass that bill, to cap out-of-pocket costs for seniors at $2,000 for the year. That's coming up in January. In both instances, in that same bill, the cap on insulin and the cap on out-of-pocket costs, that legislation is legislation that I voted for, and if I didn't vote for it, it wouldn't have passed. My opponent wants to repeal the bill that did that. So that's another big difference in this race. So you get the picture. It's a good debate, and we're going to continue the debate all throughout the next 19 days. But I'd ask you to do one more thing. You're here today because you love our country. You wouldn't be here just because you got nothing else to do. You're all busy. You're giving of your time and your resources and that of your families to help me and to help Patty and to help the country and to help our Commonwealth. But I'm asking you to do one more thing. Just keep working to get the vote out. Keep engaging people on these issues. Keep engaging people on how best to get their plan to vote implemented so that we can get the highest voter turnout ever. We set an all-time state record in 2020 in that presidential race. We should be proud of that in the middle of a pandemic. I want to set another record. Let's beat that record. Let's have the highest turnout in the history of the state because so much is at stake for the country. If we keep doing that and we keep working, if we continue to work from now until 8 o'clock on election night, I have no doubt we're going to win. And I think Kamala Harris is going to win, but we got a lot of work to do. None of us are going to win today. We've got a lot of work to do between now and Election Day. We cannot slow down. We cannot assume anything is going to work out. It will only work out if we keep working night and day until we win on election night. And when we do that, we can say that we not only won the presidential race and that I won my race and Patty won, we can also say that billionaires are not going to buy this state. So I look forward on election night. I look forward on election night to be able to say, we beat the billionaires. Thanks, everybody.
Ready?
Yes. Barbara Barr, WGAL. Senator,
Former basketball player.
Former basketball.
Also true.
We would talk rather for 10 minutes about that, but I digress. You talk about corporate greed. Haven't corporations always been in it to make a buck? And Republicans would argue that inflation is due to the rampant spending led by the Biden-Harris administration.
Well, here's what the data shows. And the Kansas City Federal Reserve did a report a couple years ago, I think it's about 2.5 years ago now, that showed that from July of 2020 to July of 2022, in that 2-year period, corporate profits went up 75% in the country, an explosion of corporate profits, 5 times the rate of inflation, and those corporate profits contributed 41% of the inflation nationwide. So that's what the Federal Reserve said. So my point is that when you see that kind of corporate greed, not the only cause of inflation, but a big driver, we have to take it on. We have to confront these companies, confront them just like folks do at the state levels. Attorneys general around the country confront these companies, bring price gouging investigations, hold them accountable, and also roll back those big corporate tax breaks. It's one way to combat the higher prices that families have seen for food and household items, but we should couple that strategy with a much more robust child tax credit, a middle-class tax cut, so that families have the wherewithal to deal with these higher prices.
Can I follow up with, do you support price controls?
No. And this price gouging legislation that I have would simply be an investigation. When prices skyrocket by a particular company, there would be a presumption of price gouging, but the Federal Trade Commission would have to prove that in a court of law with evidence, not some bureaucrat dreaming up some price level. Proving it in a court of law, the companies would be able to rebut that presumption, and then the court would make a determination whether there's price gouging or not. Once that happens a couple of times, these companies will get the message. We've already seen in the years since I've raised this issue of greedflation that this public pressure that I started and we've brought to bear has had an impact already. Some of these big companies are starting to figure out a way to reduce some prices. We've got to keep the pressure on, pass a price gouging bill, roll back their big tax cuts. Thanks, Barbara.
Yeah, Joel D. Smith from CBS 21 for both of you. The big news today is that a major leader from Hamas seems to have been killed by Israel. Does that change the calculus as to what kind of support we should have or what kind of pressure should be on Israel of what to do next?
Well, I think in so many ways the killing of Sinwar, who is a horrific terrorist who led the October 7th, 2023 assault on Israel, which killed 1,200 innocent Israelis. He led that, and he should have been taken out, and I'm glad that happened. I think it, in some ways, validates our support for Israel's efforts to confront Hamas, to dismantle it, and to remove that threat to the people of Israel. What I hope it leads to, though, is maybe now we have the possibility of a deal to return the hostages, to have a cessation or a reduction in the conflict, and also the opportunity to provide more food and medicine and medical supplies for those Palestinians who are trapped in Gaza because of the horrific practices of their terrorist leaders. And so this is a moment where we should be happy that a terrible terrorist is taken off the battlefield, but I hope it's an opening to a new chapter and maybe the beginning, at least, of the resolution of the conflict. But Senator Murray.
Yeah, I would agree completely. If the reports are true, I think it's a very important point in this conflict, that he needed to be taken out. I don't think any of us regret that at all. I'm hoping that this is a point where Hamas steps back, that we can get our support into Gaza, the Gaza Strip, and we can come back to a place where we can resolve this conflict.
Yeah, Matt with PCN. Of all of the things in the attack ads, is there any one thing you would like to refute that you think is the most important thing to refute?
How much time do you have?
I just have to tell you, I just landed last night. I turned on the news this morning and I was like, oh my God, who is paying for all of this? So Bob,
Yeah.
I really appreciate you pointing out to all of us that it's a few billionaires outside your state who are inundating the ads with stuff that, I mean, I don't even know who they're talking about. I work with Bob. I don't think any of that is true. He is one of the most amazing colleagues I have. He is an advocate for children and families. Who they're painting out there is coming from billionaires outside the state. And I've only been here a half a day and I've seen that.
By the way, the leading billionaire lives in Florida. Used to live in Illinois. A little fact check there. But look, this, I think, what is before the people of our state is a really clear choice. I mentioned earlier, it's a very clear choice on rights, very clear choice on what we're going to do with tax policy, which will affect all of our lives, and funding for major programs that help the most vulnerable among us. People have to choose. They've got to. There's no middle ground here. They have to choose one path or the other. I think they're going to choose a path where the middle class benefits, where we protect basic rights, but we got 19 days to continue to make our case.
Thank you.
I'm Casey Elliott with Fox 43. With your visit today, why do you feel like targeting moms is effective for your campaign?
Well, look, I think across the state, families are rising up, led by moms, rising up against the far right, who's trying to take away rights, whether it's the rights of women, undermining the rights of workers, which I think is the next right they want to rip away, and obviously undermining voting rights by blocking voting rights legislation in the United States Senate. My opponent does not support the voting rights legislation that I've already voted for. He doesn't support the Women's Health Protection Act, and he doesn't support the PRO Act, which Senator Murray led, the Protecting the Right to Organize Act, that is so important to protect unions and the right to organize and to grow union membership across the country. He doesn't support any of that. I think that's a basic difference in the race.
Thank you.
Now, Senator Murray has something else.
I would just say it's interesting how you asked that question of why are we targeting moms. The moms organized this. They are targeting this election because they care about what's happening to their families, to their children, to their own rights, and they are saying we need to get out and vote for Bob Casey, Kamala Harris, so that our families can be strong.
Thank you.
That was a better answer.
Both of you.
Hi, Senator Mark Levy
Hey,
from
Mark,
AP. Just wondering if you have any concerns about the Harris campaign's ground game in Pennsylvania in terms of whether they're doing enough to turn out the voters that matter.
No, I don't. And one piece of evidence that I'd cite for that is what happened last weekend. I was told that last weekend, just in terms of door knockers statewide, there were 150,000 people out, which apparently was a record, if not for all time, but certainly for this year. And the expectation is that number will continue to get even higher. So I think there's going to be a continuing robust and successful effort to get people out to vote. And we've got a long way to go between now and Election Day. 19 days will be an eternity. Still a lot of work to do, and a close presidential race, a very close Senate race. Both races are literally within 1 or 2 points. I'm certain my race is that close, and I'm pretty sure the presidential is as well. So we got to keep working to engage people and get the vote out.
This is Sean
Hey, Sean.
at Keystone. Your opponent accused you of flip-flopping the other night when it comes to your views on reproductive rights. Do you think it was fair for him to be framed that way, with your views on reproductive rights changing throughout the years?
Well, he said a lot of things that were interesting, but I think what most people understand, and I think most candidates should understand this, is when the Supreme Court made a decision in the Dobbs case in 2022, everything changed for America. all of the debates of the past kind of came to a screeching halt, and then we had to decide as a nation. Just a very simple question, very much a fork in the road. We're either going to be a nation that bans abortion or not, and that's the choice. That's the choice every American has to make. That's the choice every member of the United States Senate or House has to make, and that's where members of Congress had to decide: do you support the Women's Health Protection Act, which restores Roe and prevents the banning of abortion across the country, or not? And what we've seen since the overturning of Dobbs is the bans are not theoretical. They're in place in state after state after state. And I think a lot of Americans are realizing that the national Republican goal of banning abortion is not very far off because of what Dobbs unleashed. And also unleashed, I think, the reality for a lot of women that they face circumstances that we can't even begin to imagine. I can't even begin to imagine. I'm not sure anyone can until they're faced with the horrific nightmare of, like the example of a woman in Florida, hemorrhaging so much that she was placed on a ventilator and almost died because she was in a state where she wasn't given access to reproductive care. A 10-year-old girl, a child in Ohio being raped and being, I guess, 6 weeks pregnant, having to leave that state to have an abortion. This is the reality of the aftermath of Dobbs, and the way to provide a remedy for that is to restore Roe. And Senator Murray, of course, has been one of the leaders in the country of protecting women's rights.
Well, you started by asking about where Bob is. I have no qualms about where Bob is as a leader in the Senate on fighting for women's reproductive rights. Whether I've gone out there to pass the Women's Health Protection Act to restore Roe, Bob's been at my side. When I sponsored legislation to make sure that women in this country had access to IVF, Bob was at my side. Republicans opposed both of those. Wouldn't allow it to come up for a vote in the Senate. When we tried to pass legislation to make sure that women could travel out of state to get the kind of health care they need, Bob was at my side. Republicans opposed that. In the case of rape or incest, when we have tried to make sure that women in this country have had access, Bob's been at my side. His opponent, my understanding, says that even in the case of rape or incest, he opposes the right for a woman to make her own health care choice. That's not who we are as a country. We want to make sure women have reproductive freedom, and that is at stake in this state and across the country in this election.
Thank you, everybody.
Good job.